including Mayor Gary McNamara, Joe Becchetti, Mark Gomes, Paul Sweet, and myself, as well as our Ontario Provincial Police are represented with Inspector Glenn Miller, Staff Sergeant Jamie Smith, and Sergeant Byron Hornick. We also have Margaret Isaac Evans, our CAO, as our board secretary. Recording today is Ellen Broichat, administration, and we're being assisted by Sean Firth from the IT department. So that's our roll call. I would ask all members, is there anyone here who has to declare that they have a pecuniary interest for the things today? Seeing none, we'll move on. I'm looking for a motion that the supplementary agenda for the Police Service Board meeting dated May the 14th as duplicated and delivered to the members thereof be accepted. I'm looking for a mover.
Also move, Mr. Chair.
Okay, you can indicate by your hand only if you want to. And I saw Joe Becchetti seconded it. Is there any comment on the agenda at all? All in favor? Passed. Thank you. Okay. Our previous minutes I'm looking for our regular meeting of March the 4th, 2020, our Police Service Board meeting, as duplicated and delivered to the members thereof. And I'm looking for that to be adopted. I'm looking for a mover, Mayor McNamara, a seconder, Mark. So Mark Gomes, all in favor? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, delegations, there are none, obviously, because of the situation. And we're on to our monthly report from the OPP, and we're going to be covering the month of April. Prior to that, Inspector Glenn Miller wanted to have a couple of words to us with regard to what's going on with the OPP under the Emergency Measures Act. Inspector Miller.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Again, thank you very much. It's a unique opportunity for us, and I'm glad that we're able to continue the meeting in this particular forum. And I think over time, we're going to get used to doing this probably a lot. As everyone is aware, a state of emergency was declared in the province of Ontario on March the 17th of this year. The OPP, the way that we are structured in our operational stance, we're in the business of emergency preparedness, so we have to prepare all times for eventualities such as this. And in this particular case, being a health crisis, and being a pandemic, that's certainly within our operations business continuity plan that we do practice for. A lot of things take place very quickly, and it's required to do so. Immediately, all the members working not only in Essex County, and I'm kind of speaking more strategically and more broadly, Mr. Chair. Yes, the Commissioner canceled all annual leave for members. All discretionary leave was canceled as well. So basically what we had is we had certainly an enhanced level of police officers and civilian staff operating within our various detachments. It's important to protect our members. Every single day we deal in a high-risk environment. Not unusual for us to be dealing with individuals with infectious diseases. I think perhaps that's why the transition for us, in order to be fully equipped and to utilize PPE, personal protection equipment, that is basically the norm for the OPP anyways. We are well equipped for those particular circumstances. We did want to certainly limit the individuals that we do have working for us to the potential of contacting this particular virus. So as a result, all the calls that to the officers would be dispatched to through our communications operations center in London, the calls were screened, and they're screened in the sense is that the individuals were asked a series of questions. We know that not always are people going to be honest with us as to their particular situation, because they simply want to be able to speak to a police officer. But we do provide that information in advance, and we get that so that the officers, when they're arriving on scene, they knew to keep proper distancing. If there's opportunities not to go into a home or not to be hands-on, that's certainly what they did. to apply. Want to make sure that everyone stays healthy. I can say with the large numbers of officers and civilian staff that we do have working for the OPP, we're very fortunate, and the exposure to our members was very limited. Any impacts that we had were never noticeable or felt or really known too much. And I can honestly say that now we have actually everybody back to work that may have been impacted or thought that they were impacted in any particular way. Noticeably, our calls for service dropped significantly. It's kind of an interesting note that when something like this happens, things that individuals would normally call the police about, they stop calling. Our normal call volume, and Staff Sergeant Smith will get into this later, usually across the county is around, in the month of April, around 4,000 calls a month. We dropped that considerably by about 33%. What we also notice is a drop in violent crime by almost 28%, property crime 18%. However, the number of charges that we laid in relation to property crime and street crime actually increased. And again, those are because of ongoing investigations only and not necessarily attributable to COVID-19. All of our members that were out of the country or overseas were advised to return back to their point of work, back to Essex County, and they did. But of course, they had to abide by the same rules and regulations that all of you have gone and done. And that would be requiring for a self-quarantine for a period of time for 14 days. So we received volumes and volumes of emails from the provincial government. We were responsible for enforcing certainly the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. And I believe at that time, the Solicitor General did issue a document to each of the respective towns and mayors and CAOs and board chairs to advise them that this has now become a very busy time for the police and us dealing with issues and certainly preparing for the future, so that we would be calling upon those individuals that work for the municipality, in this case for Tecumseh, and the municipal bylaw officers, that they were then given that authority to lay those applicable charges similar to what we would be getting. And we asked in most cases that they look after that so that we could keep our officers freed up for those significant and salient calls that they continue to deal with at that particular time. There was an assumption, I think, by the public that the police were not stopping vehicles or that we would not stop vehicles. I can tell you that was a wrong assumption, and it was an assumption that was quickly learned by those individuals that decided to disobey the rules of the road, amongst other things. And they certainly have been dealt with appropriately by the officers that are working. We also, fortunately, because of our change in our structure in dealing with 911 calls, we saw a drop, Mr. Chair, of a drop of 88% in 911 calls. That is significant, and that's certainly positive for the community as well. Mental health calls, a lot of people would have an assumption that initially when this started and as things start to move forward, that we would see an increase in our mental health calls. And actually, we haven't. It's very consistent with previous months and previous years. The assumption sometimes being at a particular time like this, when people are not able to go to work and are required to be at home and kind of limit their exposure to different things, that can have a really negative impact on people. We found that the most significant month for us, and it's only because of the analytical data that we review all the time, is actually the month of May for mental health calls. It is not the month of December before Christmas, which a lot of people kind of would assume. Our offenses in relation to drugs dropped, and I would say the reason being our borders have been closed. It's very difficult then for various criminal or organized criminal groups that regularly transport contraband, illicit drugs across our borders. A greater percentage of them then were being interdicted because less people were crossing the border. So the amount of drugs within a community was impacted. That created certainly a lesser of a volume of calls for us. We noticed that overdoses during this particular time, Mr. Chair, have dropped, but however, I can say, unfortunately, that suicides are up. So that's kind of the extreme that we've gone and dealt with. Across the county, and Staff Sergeant Smith will speak specifically to the town of Tecumseh, we have handled around 570 COVID-related occurrences. And yes, in some particular cases, when appropriate, we have laid charges. The operational stance for the OPP is always an education piece first. We want to be able to educate the people and continue to educate the people as to what the current rules are. I know the mayor keeps attuned to this on a daily basis or hourly basis as information continues to flow from the government. So we've seen today that things are gradually starting to slowly open up across the province. But again, that's very slowly. So we have to adapt to that as well, as far as the expectations that the public certainly has of us. So we have now kind of structured ourselves that we're healthy, we're in good shape operationally, that regardless of what the significant event that could happen above and beyond this particular emergency crisis, the OPP remains well positioned in order to respond. So much so that we've now granted discretionary leave back to the officers again, and also for an opportunity for them to take their scheduled holidays if they wish. Not surprising, there's no place to go for your holidays. So that's why I think our staffing levels will always remain at the appropriate level to provide adequate and effective policing for the town of Tecumseh. I just, before I conclude, Mr. Chair, it's a great opportunity for me to be able to speak not only to the board, but to those members of the community of Tecumseh that are listening late this afternoon. We realize that this has been a difficult time for absolutely everyone. We realize the degrees of frustration that this has caused, both personally and professionally, to you as well. We want to thank you for supporting the OPP, certainly supporting all the frontline workers that on a daily basis, including as we're speaking right now, continuing to deal with occurrences as we always have, and trying to do our absolute best for the community of Tecumseh. So, Mr. Chair, I'll just a little bit more of an overview, perhaps maybe than what you would, I'm not sure. But I will then I'll close my comments and I'll just turn it back over to Staff Sergeant Smith.
Before we go on to item 2, which is the staff's report to us on April occurrences, I'd like to open it up to our board if there are questions of you with regard to this, what's been going on in the last. Mayor McNamara, I see your hand up.
It's just to add to the inspector's comments about things reopening and slowly, and that was announced by the Premier today in particular. But I think it's very, very important also for general public, although we know what it is to have a lot of kids and they're pent up for the last 2 or 3 months, and depending on how Mother Nature is going to deal with the weather moving forward this weekend, we're still, our parks are open, and there's still, the equipment is closed. And until further notice, obviously, there's still that virus that's among us. And the reason why it's been knocked down is because we've had the social distancing and so forth. Just for the OPP officers that are going to be out there on the weekend and so forth, and we still, asking the general public to be vigilant, but also to be patient a little bit longer. And the equipment in our parks will still be closed. It's basically for jogging, walking, biking, cycling. All of that is certainly welcome. Fresh air is a good thing, but the equipment itself will be closed. So I certainly want to make that pretty clear as well.
Thank you, Your Worship. Are there any other members of the board have questions? Seeing no hands raised, Staff Sergeant Smith, would you go lead us through the April report from the OPP? And just we'll wait, maybe take a second so Sean can load it up. There it is. It's on the screen. Okay. Please proceed.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Hales, and welcome, Your Worship, and everyone with us today. Sean, if you just want to go down to the first slide there for top calls for service, I believe it'll be page 4 for Tecumseh. And thank you, Inspector, for your overview. Just going to the top views, or top calls for service. Other provincial statutes is at 56 calls, and this is directly from the EMCPA, the calls for COVID-19 related calls. And as we work through them, your alarm calls are next, and I'm working all the way down to 911 missed dials, which, as you're aware, used to be the top call for service, but since we've implemented a new policy, we've started to find this to be the lowest call. And in between there, the only thing we really have criminal is the thefts, and we had 15 of them. So I'll ask if Sean can go to the next page for calls for service. So you can see in Tecumseh, there's been an overall 33.3 decrease. And Tecumseh is down a good 325 calls there. From the previous past years, we were sitting around 650, and now we're down to 359. So I think with everybody being at home, away from work, not traveling, not out of the house as much, that significantly impacted our calls for service. If you want to go to the next slide there, Sean? Thank you. Violent crimes, we're down a bit there from the previous year. There's been a 28.6 decrease in 2020, and our clearance rate is sitting around 80% for that. If you want to go to the next slide. Property crimes, we've seen a decrease in that. Criminals are still out there and trying to take advantage of the situation, thinking the police might not be out there, they're busy with other things. We did have a decrease in Tecumseh, a slight decrease from the previous years, and the clearance rate is sitting at about 20.6. Motor vehicle collisions, we're down there, and that's due to the motoring public not working, staying at home, the orders that were in place. So we see a significant decrease of 42.2%, which is good for us, good for the insurance companies. And the Collision Reporting Center took 13.5% of the collisions away from the frontline officers. If you want to go to the next one there, Sean? Right now, you can hold there if you want, Sean. MVC's fatalities, we're sitting at 5 collisions that have resulted in 5 deaths. We haven't had any in Tecumseh that I'm aware of so far this year, so that's good news, and we hope to keep them down with our traffic initiatives that we're currently doing. We have the Canadian Road Safety Week going on, and I'm sure you've seen from some of the news releases that we've had many of the stunt driving going on, similar to what was going on in the GTA area with the speeds in excess of 200, some 300 kilometers per hour. We're getting some of those speeds, not quite that high, but we've had quite a few stunt drivers in this area in Essex County the last couple of days. For the month of April, the impaireds have remained consistent. We've been at 0 for that right now, and as you're aware, a lot of the bars are not open. The traffic's down right now, and those remain the same in the town of Tecumseh. So driver's license suspensions are also down to 0. So you'll see in the upcoming slide here after reviewing the overview of this report, our traffic stops are down significantly, and that's because of the roadways. I'm sure you've experienced it driving to and from places, whether you're still going to work. It's a little bit eerie some days when you're driving and you're not seeing anybody on the road. So those are down quite a bit from previous years. our criminal code charges overall in the county have went up 56.4% as to compared to last year. And Tecumseh's have went up slightly from 11 last year up to 18. They've increased a little bit. Drug offenses, they've remained somewhat the same, and some of the laws have changed, as you're aware. So we're sitting at 2 for CDSA and 2 for the Cannabis Control Act. There has been a 45% decrease, and that could be because of the new laws that have been put in place by the government. Not surprising, and we'll be coming up to our traffic stops as well. The POA charges are down a bit again. I relate this to the COVID-19, and you can see it across our whole county that the traffic or the POA offenses are down. We had to cancel a traffic initiative last month, and also not as much traffic. And I think that, sometimes, with the motoring public, they might be fearful of us pulling them over as well in relation to COVID-19. Not all of our officers are walking up with masks on, but we've taken precautions as to how we approach vehicles. We may approach from the passenger side, trying to keep our social distancing. So they're down. I expect they'll be up this month. You can go to the next slide. And there's the traffic stops, and you can see across the board, across the county, once again, that they are down, from 102 last year, down to 22. So there's been an overall decrease of 32.2%. We've been trying to get back to business, and with Canadian Road Safety Week going on this week, I can tell you there's lots of traffic stops that are occurring right now, and we're slowly getting back to some sort of normal. Mental health response calls, they did go up in Tecumseh. I know you're aware of our mental health response teams and our YCERT and MCERT teams that have been out there assisting the officers, and it helps with the frontline officers in the sense that they may not have to go to the hospital with the individual. The individual is provided with the resources at the location where the officers meet them. Or sometimes if they have to go to the hospital, our teams are going to the hospital, and the wait times are going down significantly for that. So there has been a bit of an increase there compared to last year. 911 hangups, again, from all your work that you did lobbying for this, we did see a huge decrease in these from 100 last year down to 11, and this is an opportunity for officers to get out there and do the things they need to be doing. The 911 calls are important, and you can see there's been an 88.3 decrease, and I believe the inspector touched on these in his overview. False alarms are sitting at 43. It went down somewhat, and Tecumseh seems to experience around the same number month to month, sitting around 43. Ride programs and auxiliary service. I'm not sure that the inspector touched on our auxiliary. We've suspended them for the time being due to COVID-19. We've kept them at home with their families and kind of protected them from coming out from us with social distancing and the fact that they have to ride along with us. We've kind of suspended that for the time being. I'm not sure when that'll be back in place. And same with rides. I mean, the motoring public, I don't think would expect to be stopped during COVID-19 and that interaction with social distancing. So you can see across the board there that our numbers are 0, but I fully expect that next month you'll start to see an increase in that, and we'll start getting back to normal business. I think just for some notable investigations, we had a call into the commercial district of Tecumseh down south, and we had a break and enter occurring there, and we had an individual call us who was watching this occur on his camera system, and a U-Haul truck was being utilized to do these property crimes, and the suspects were subsequently arrested for that. And also we attended a family dispute with a 20-year-old male who was arrested, and subsequent information came in about a firearms being tucked under the individual's bed, and he was arrested for that. And I think, Sean, that might be it for the report.
Before we leave the report, there may be some questions from members of the board. So we all have our own reports in front of us, so it doesn't have to be on the screen. But are there any questions from anybody with regard to this April report? Certainly, I would ask if there are any outstanding citizen complaints that have not been resolved against our detachment. That's asked. I don't believe so.
Yeah, no, there isn't.
I
No.
think Paul might have had a question there, Chair.
Say again?
I think Paul might have a question there.
I didn't see his, I don't have him on my screen, unfortunately. Sorry, Paul. Please, go ahead.
Just a quick question in regards to alarms. I noticed like ours are running comparatively across the county higher, just to the staff sergeant through the chair. Are they, I mean, residential or commercial? Like I kind of put you on a spot there, but if you happen to know like what type of alarm leads are our numbers?
Yeah, and I don't have the stats in front of me to speak to that in regard to the breakup, but I can tell you from listening to the calls for service throughout the day and nights, a lot of commercial alarms down the south end of the town with all the tool and die businesses when they open up in the morning or there's cleaning going on. A lot of times that's what's occurring, and that's probably why you're seeing the increase in alarms or the steady numbers in alarms due to those businesses.
Thank you.
Mayor McNamara.
Through you to our CAO, can we also just at some point have a conversation with our fire chief as well to see if we're getting any cross-pollination in terms of the false alarms and so forth? But I'm curious to see through inspections how many have been kind of repeats. So it seems from the staff sergeant's comments and that it seems to be very consistent, the same kind of that number, and maybe we can I would like to see in terms internally, if they're being processed, if they're faulty, they need to be repaired, false alarms and so forth, and how many occurrences within the same business or a private home that have been identified over a period of time. We should have some record of that, and then to make sure that we do have a mechanism in place, to collect fees after so many false alarms. And I like to, it seems to be in that same slot where it's always been, with the misdials and so forth, right at the head of our fees for call.
Your worship, can I ask a quick question then? Are you wondering if smoke and heat alarms are rolled in with intrusion alarms? That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
Some of them are interconnected,
Okay.
and so I'd be curious to see how many we're getting, and especially with the non-registered portion. If these are not registered, then obviously there's a mechanism in place to collect, because obviously when police go, there's a cost to that. If fire goes, that's a huge cost as well.
Big time.
So I would like to, because it's so consistent. That's the thing that, month to month to month.
So very quickly, for clarification, I'll ask Jamie, and maybe this is unfair. Do you find that in a month you are responding along with fire to smoke heat alarm systems, or are you mostly responding to intrusions?
I'll say the intrusion alarms. I can't think of offhand many that we went to with the fire.
Okay. Paul, I saw you also had a question, please.
Yeah, I guess just the reason why I asked the question was I expected, because our number's been running relatively high with COVID. I expected that to drop with people being like, especially residential alarms. People are home, that there would have been some kind of a drop. So kind of as the staff sergeant indicates, it certainly points maybe to commercial rather than residential trips.
Are there any other questions? I just have to make a little scan to go to the other side of our board.
Mr. Chair, it's Inspector Miller.
Please. Yes, please.
Yeah, can I just make a comment? I know you haven't asked me this question, but I often hear kind of people talking about it. in the news as to the nature of some of our calls. So as you know, there's a lot of people that live within the same residence but don't necessarily get along well with each other, right? So that's why they kind of miss not going to work and being away from each other.
Yeah.
So the question I know that Jamie deals with, and I know that Sergeant Byron Hornick deals with as well, is, have you seen an increase in the number of domestic related calls? Well, I can say that that's fairly consistent for us throughout your community and throughout all the communities. That generally doesn't change too much. But
Okay.
what we have noticed, I would say, is certainly a slight elevation in the number of calls dealing with child custody issues. That is constant on a daily basis that the officers are dealing with that. So you can imagine one particular parent has custody of that particular child or the children, and then someone is coming to pick them up, the other spouse or partner. That is pretty significant right now for our police officers working in their community of dealing with that in the most effective ways, and that's where the frustration goes. So I just kind of wanted to mention that. I know I've heard it on the news as well about domestic violence must be way up, and I don't know if it's way up to us. It's just a constant factor. I think whether it was last night in your community or in Lakeshore, we deal with some fairly significant calls where the ramifications ends up resulting in criminal code charges against people. So can't speak in any detail on that, but that's ongoing. But I think that the moms and dads and everybody are trying their best in making sure that the court orders that are currently in place dealing with children is being adhered to. And if not, they call the OPP, and they certainly don't hesitate in doing that.
Thank you. Okay, I see no other hands up, so I would call for a motion that the OPP report for the months of February through April be received. I'm looking for someone to move that. Paul, seconded Mayor McNamara. Any other discussion on that? None? All in favor? Passed. Thank you. We'll move on to section 8, reports. There are none. I in our agenda are communications action required, and there are none. So we have communications for information purposes under section J of our agenda. We note that the Tecumseh Town Council and Mayor McNamara's letter with regard to 911 misdials is still receiving support from some municipalities. And that's a good thing. There's been a lot of support for that, so that's a good thing. The Ontario Association of Police Service Boards spring conference obviously has been canceled because of COVID. We are going to hold some kind of a modified electronic, actually just the annual general meeting, which would be required to pass budgets and approve the board. And we'll talk about that a little later. Item 4 is a letter that the town of Tecumseh sent to the town of Lakeshore. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I would like Mayor McNamara to fill us in. This is for people who are listening in. So under the new police, currently every town has a police service board in Essex County that has a OPP service contract. So that's Tecumseh, Lakeshore, Essex, Leamington, and Kingsmill. Under the new Police Service Act that's being passed by legislation and the regulations that are coming out, the Ontario government wants to see a detachment-based board. So that would be that the Essex detachment would be governed by one board with members from each of the municipalities under contract. It also would have to include Pelee Island because Pelee Island is serviced by the Ontario Provincial Police, and also the possibility of representation by the Caldwell First Nations. We're not sure about that because they don't have reservation land, but that we're going to have to find out about. At any rate, the 5 municipalities met under the sponsorship of Tecumseh, and they came to an understanding as to how that they would like to constitute a single police service board. It was It was a facilitated meeting. We agreed on the agenda and we agreed on the outcome of the meeting, and a report was written and adopted by the 5 municipalities and presented both to the Solicitor General and to also the Ontario Association of Police Service Boards. Just for clarification, it would include a board that had 2 representatives from each of our municipalities and probably 1 representative off of Pelee Island because it's a very smaller municipality. And at the discretion of the Ontario government, if they wanted to provide Ontario representatives from their choosing, they could do that. So that went forward, and subsequent to that, the Lakeshore Police Service Board had another idea. So I'll let Mayor McNamara pick up the thread at that point. You're muted. You're muted, Mayor McNamara.
Yeah, after the report that was filed and it was moderated by a consultant, and in the final recommendation that was sent to the Solicitor General was on the 5 boards becoming 1 board or a detachment board. Subsequent to that, a letter was sent to the Solicitor General, unbeknownst to the 4 other partners, on a new model where it would have been a south and north and south 2-board system. And the letter was sent to, obviously, the town, as we are also a northern municipality in the county. And with obviously, without having another meeting, working with our partners in Essex and Kingsville and Leamington, it was pretty difficult for us to support a recommendation without having a conversation with our 3 other partners. And subsequent to that, a letter I authored and sent on to all of the partners is that we continue, the town, to support a police services board model for the Essex detachment. We made that agreement, and I felt compelled that we should continue unless all 5 partners come in and say otherwise moving forward. I think we still have a lot to do in terms of the composition of the board itself. And I think that can be alluded to our next, there is a discussion paper that's been prepared by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, kind of dictate a little bit of what they'd like to see. So the long and short of it is basically we continue to support the initial request of 1 board representing the 5 municipalities.
Yeah, just to supplement that, arriving at that meeting and coming up with an agreement has been about a 3-year piece of business. It's not something very, so I think our board was quite shocked when we had what we thought was an agreement as to how to constitute a single police service board. And this letter appeared with a separate idea that we had never talked about, nor had we ever agreed to. So Mayor McNamara, I thank you for just filling out the rest of the details. I notice under section 5 is required by our bylaws is a notification of the annual general meeting of our association. It will be an electronic meeting. We also met electronically as Zone 6, Southwestern Ontario, and the agenda and the minutes are appended herein. And number 7 is a letter from the Solicitor General talking about the extension of the deadline for community safety and well-being plans. And that's for information. And I believe Margaret will be speaking to that later on in the meeting anyway in detail, but that's theirs to us. And finally, there's a discussion paper of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario that we have that, I don't know, Mayor McNamara, did you want to speak to that? That's a fairly lengthy paper, but it kind of falls in line with what we've talked about. It's this paper here. You know? I don't know if you want to just do a quick Reader's Digest version of that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're right. It's quite an in-depth report that's been put forward by the task force for AMO, and it's been presented to the AMO board and supported. And it's if I could digress a little bit, this is something that's been a build-up ever since 2012 from the new OPP billing model that was introduced there, and also 2015, the AMO's position or white paper on police modernization. And without, this report is quite in depth, and it refers to new ways of policing and governance overview and so forth. But I said there's some key points in there, and I just want to, I think of interest to the police services boards, and especially the local here as well, is that they're still gathering information as well in terms of the makeup of the board itself, provincial appointees, municipal appointees, or combination of both continuing, or should it be a local municipal appointed boards? It wouldn't be unique to certainly the province of Ontario, but we've seen some of our sister associations in Western Canada and also the province of Quebec, where they're all municipal representatives that sit on the boards themselves. So the government is still, gathering that information. You'll see it probably in the latter part of the summary of the report that's been prepared. And the rationale for that is something that you hate to say the tardiness, but of provincial appointees. And if we are going to have a governance model and with a well-trained board representing the interests of the community, working hand in glove with the police service, you need to have a full operating board. And you'll see the numbers, a very high percentage. And some boards had no representation from the province itself. And so it's pretty difficult to enhance, improve governance when you never have a full operating board. So with that, you can see the model where the possibility where even employees of the community, like in other Western jurisdictions, also have representation within the Police Services Board. So there's something to be had if we're going to unite and have one board, and so to better represent all of our communities at the time when we're developing those community safety plans with our detachment commander and certainly the leadership team at the OPP. It makes sense to have grassroots here and so forth. So there's an opportunity for us to continue to march on to bring this. The government is still open-minded enough to look at geographical areas where it makes sense to have unified boards. You can't look at Southern Ontario and look at Northern Ontario. The geography just doesn't. It just doesn't accommodate the one board itself and so forth. So the government and what we're hoping is that in our paper and with the 7 regional meetings that we did have, and I know that many have attended, yourself, Mr. Chair, and certainly our CAO has attended those meetings as well in London and I believe in the Toronto area, the GTA. You can still see that there's some great opportunities for us to continue to fill some of the basic needs or the needs to have a board that that understands moving forward on what the requirements are going to be in good governance and also how to support the new Police Services Act. So I would encourage I believe there might be an opportunity for us to even put that report on our website. It's public document,
Yeah.
so that the general audience who are listening from home can actually avail themselves of that report itself. And they'll see in terms of how in depth AMO has gone in working with various, from the police chiefs of Ontario to the OPP and to many other organizations that help support our communities for public safety.
I would add one small thing to that, is that that report pretty much lines up the discussions we have had at our police service board. We are pretty much in agreement with everything that's in there. The most important, well, some of the most important parts that I see is if our police service boards are going to be asked to assist the OPP in the creation of their business model, if we're going to be asked to sit on the community safety and well-being planning committees, if we are going to be asked to engage the community and all the stakeholders like the new act requires, we need to be trained, and AMO has seen that, and they have also addressed the point of who's going to pay, because this is going to be a very big job for citizen volunteers, and they need to be trained in order to be able to do that. So thank you, Mayor McNamara.
Yeah,
for your,
the only other thing that I want to add too, and for sometimes a bit of a misconception in terms, this doesn't mean this whole document that's being presented, it doesn't mean that's going to be lowering policing costs.
no.
I want to make that very clear. You know, some people think that this is all part of that process. That's a process for another day. This is basically on governance and representation at the municipal level.
Yeah. Are there any Margaret, please?
If I may, through the chair, and just in response to Mayor McNamara's comment that the discussion paper should be posted, it is posted to the website on this agenda, Mayor McNamara, so it is public.
Okay. So with that, I'm looking for a motion that the correspondence that we have just looked at from items 1 through 8 be received. I'm looking for someone to move that. Mark is moving it, and we need a seconder, please. Mayor McNamara. Any other discussion on the motion? All in favor? Okay, very good. Old business. This is something that's been, that is an obligation of our board to report back to council, and I'm very pleased that it's on our agenda now. And it is with regard to the citizen satisfaction survey. The Essex Detachment has prepared a very lengthy and well-documented response. I'm not sure who is going to lead us through that. Inspector Miller, are you going to do that?
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to speak on the report if I can, and just kind of from my observations, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, as everyone knows, the OPP is an analytically driven organization. We rely heavily upon statistics, and we get certainly those statistics through the number of calls for service that we report to in our various areas, and in particular the town of Tecumseh. So what we did is myself and Jamie and Byron asked for actually our analysts to review the data, the hard data that we have in what has been taking place within the town of Tecumseh. And we had a look at one particular area, just Ward 2. The reason, Mr. Chair, that we chose Ward 2 was simply because it kind of had the lowest drop in terms of satisfaction level for the OPP. So we thought that would probably be a good comparable. The town of Tecumseh is very large, as you know. So we had a look at what is taking place within that particular area. And one of the areas that stood out for us, and I don't think it's surprising to any of the members of the board or members of town council or members of the public, is one of the most significant calls for service that we continue to get, certainly within Ward 2 and across the area, is a number of motor vehicle complaints. So that would either be motor vehicle collisions, or that would simply be traffic-related complaints. So fortunately, we looked at the data for 1 year prior to the town doing this particular survey. We did have in Ward 2 about 94 motor vehicle collisions. We had 6 personal injury collisions. The personal injury collisions that we had were all minor in nature, and 4 of them resulted in personal motor vehicle collisions involving pedestrians. So the question that we always ask in a particular area, and we've asked it in this particular, is why are the motoring public not obeying the rules of the road? I mean, I think that's a valid question. We also take a look at a community, and I would ask, this is a question that I am asking, is what traffic calming measures have the town put in place? So I know you've put certain traffic calming measures in parts of your community. So when I take a look at the Ward 2 area, whether it be just the engineering of the streets, and I'm not just talking about the reduction in speed signs, because you can reduce the speed, however, people will still, unfortunately, they'll still exceed the speed limit. They'll still go and do that. So we're kind of interested as to what the volume of traffic, say in the last 2 or 3 or 5 years, how much more traffic is coming into that particular area, you know, whether it be along Riverside Drive or just, you know, along County 22, that entire area. What is that volume? And what has changed with the roads in order to encourage the motoring public to abide by those particular rules? So you've gone and done that in other areas very successfully, I would add. I think in the area where Chair Chris Hales lives, you don't have the roundabouts, but you have those other measures that are in place that tend to kind of slow vehicles down. We're interested in learning what the methodology is when you've put roundabouts in place. So when you've done the roundabouts, whether at Brighton and Old Tecumseh or Manning and Riverside, we'd like to know what was the reason why you did that there in that particular location. And I'm sure it's grounded in some statistics, but that's what we kind of have a look at as well. I can also talk about that's in just relation to traffic. One of the other significant calls during that particular time, believe it or not, was shoplifting. We saw an increase in a year of over 208% in shoplifting offenses. So what's that's attributable to is the crime prevention teams that the various businesses now employ, where they used to maybe give a warning to people. They don't anymore. They simply want those particular individuals charged. So that has certainly been keeping us busy. We have a lot of cross-border traffic. That's why it's important, whatever that data is on the volume of traffic in the last 5 years. As a result, we have a lot of suspicious vehicles that do get reported to the police. That causes certainly, I would think, a concern by the community as to who these people are that they see kind of out walking about and doing different things, of which we make a response to. In relation to property-related crime in the area, again, we're fairly successful at identifying those individuals that are responsible. We do place a lot back as part of the community mobilization model in asking the community to look after the safety and security of their property. And it's as simple as locking your car, or securing your garage door or your back door, and different things like that. People with an intent will generally be successful despite whatever parameters or security is in place in a particular area. It is important, and we do respond to all calls for service. The timeliness of us getting those calls is absolutely paramount. So I know that the board is well aware of this. The board supports us on this. For the individuals that may be listening at home, I would encourage you, when you see something, please don't just simply talk to your neighbor about it, or perhaps even reach to town hall. You may do that later. Your first phone call immediately needs to be to the police, because our assets are continually moving all the time. So we're usually able to identify those people as well. So we do a number of focus patrols in the area. We started doing focus patrols when we started experiencing a number of residential break-ins to various areas. We did have also during that particular time frame that the survey took place, some rather significant calls for service that did require a large police presence. And I'm sure that if people were wondering what was going on, that may have been a concern to them at that particular time. And that certainly could have been voiced or contributed through the survey. So that being said, that's just kind of our view of what's taking place. We know the number of issues that are taking place within the community, but for the satisfaction level of the police not being as satisfied as much in that particular area in other areas, we continue to do our job. The court system does not allow us to keep people in custody. Basically, it is very, very hard under the Bail Reform Act. We basically we arrest them and then we do the paperwork. We release them. In that particular area, we were rearresting people that we had arrested within the previous 24 hours that were continuing to commit those crimes. So I can see that people may think that the community is not as safe. I can tell you that your community certainly is, and the comparables are obvious if you even compared it to your bordering, the bordering city there. Again, that's a very large area as well, but bad guys generally travel outside of the area. Riverside Drive is a heavily traveled area as well. So we do a lot of interdiction along there. People end up feeding their way. They're used to maybe seeing a police car on Riverside Drive, so they find other ways of going in and out of your communities. It certainly draws attention, and I'm sure presents an atmosphere at times when things aren't, they don't feel as comfortable. A lot of municipal bylaw incidences. We've responded, I think, to 48 different municipal bylaw offenses. Those are the ones that we were told about, and and most of them are related to parking infractions. Those vehicles are ticketed. Chances are a lot of the people just accept the fine and continue and to go and do that. So we don't really have the ability to seize a vehicle that's contributing to some of those different things that are taking place. I think it's important just as a police service, and I will take that as my responsibility and the responsibility of all people, is when we do an investigation, we do the processing. If there's a specific victim of a crime, we are very focused in dealing with that particular victim of crime because we're a victim-focused organization. Some of the lesser calls in nature that don't go to the degree of a threat to the community, often we are not able to get back to the individual that reported it. And the reason that we can't is because a lot of those become anonymous complaints. We always like to be able to go back to the person or at least give them a call and say, this is the action that we did take. So I know that the town is good at forwarding to us immediately anything that would come to them directly, and I'd really prefer it to come to us directly, but it goes to town, so they're doing their job by giving it to us. And that's immediately actioned by people such as Byron and by Jamie for us to get those resources out there to engage with the public in the way that we should always be doing, to listen to what's taking place and ask what it is that we can go and do. So that's just a kind of a bit of a snapshot. It's not making any excuses at all. We value the opinions that are offered by the different residences, but again, we're just dealing with the factual information that we have here. We can say that during that particular time, we actually saw a decrease of 37.5% in residential break and enters. And that's usually an area that if that's going to be a concern within a community, that will be well voiced to us as well. getting a lot of different types of commercial break and enters. And the item that's being stolen, most common in your particular area, in that particular, is cash. So who are stealing cash? So it's not people that are starving that need to go and provide a good meal for themselves. It's people that require money for other vices that they would have, unfortunately, in life. So we try to move our, not only our uniform officers, everybody assumes that if they don't see the police that we're not there. I've often used the words, if you don't see us, that's okay, but we see you. Because we have a lot of different assets that we put into those areas. And it's not just the typical black and white. So we try to be strategic in our approach, and our analyst gives us that information. So before it becomes an issue, we try to get ahead of it if we can. We do apologize if we have disappointed the public in any way. But we also encourage the public to talk to our police officers that are on the road. They're all very approachable. They love to have discussions with people. They're communicators. And we have no problem in explaining what we can within the provisions of the law that we're allowed to have those type of discussions. So I hope that just provides a little bit of an overview, Mr. Chair.
Well, Inspector, if I could just maybe put a little context to this. So our obligation as the Police Service Board is to report to council. I believe these minutes and the agenda with all the attachment becomes property of council, and they can see the statistical analysis. But I think your voice to council is probably has as much weight or more weight than reading statistic charts. We know that there are municipalities next to us that are looking at their police service. I think Tecumseh has been one of the mainstays of the Ontario Provincial Police Contract Service in Southwestern Ontario for a very long time. I don't see any groundswell of wanting to change, but I think council certainly is under some heat because people are very proud of the fact that we are such a safe community. So I guess where I'm leading to is with this board's discussion after I've had my say, perhaps it would be a good thing to schedule when council resumes under its full format to have a presentation, a general overview of what's going on in Tecumseh from you. We do that about once a year anyway, and maybe with a little focus towards explaining what you see going on in Tecumseh, what your people on the streets see, and that might go a long way to alleviating some of the stressors that our counselors are hearing from citizens who are, reading statistics and drawing maybe not necessarily the conclusions that you're drawing from the statistics. Okay, so I certainly can't make that by myself, but I think our board should discuss what we want to do with this information and how we want to move forward with it. And I think we have representatives of council here, the best we can have, so that they can tell us whether council would be predisposed eventually to hearing from you and discussing the state of policing in Tecumseh. Your worship, and Joe, if you'd like to jump in on this, I certainly would appreciate it.
Even at the onset of meeting, virtual meetings and so forth, we still have the capabilities of delegation, and even at our own council meeting and general public as we're meeting today in the same context, there's no reason why we can't meet and as we have in the past. It's just the medium will be a little different, but the opportunity to address council and probably a greater viewing audience. Normally, you've all been at our council meetings, and there's a lot of empty chairs, and so there's certainly some opportunities to not only bring the message to council, but also to which I think is very important, but also our general public, which are certainly tuning in, and they're getting a little bit more accustomed to our virtual meetings. So through delegations, I'm sure through an invitation, I'm sure that Inspector Miller and or Staff Sergeant Smith or Sergeant Hornick would gladly would participate in as a delegation to do the presentation in terms of reinforcing the community in terms of we are a safe community. There's no doubt we are, and also to address the fact that there was slippage, and I'm more concerned in terms of the survey coming next year or 2 years from now to see what the real numbers are, and I think at that point we can shore up whatever issues that come forward. I mean, right now it's an anomaly in terms of we're faced with the pandemic. It has kept more people at home, but and with businesses being closed, it's kind of, folks have kind of shifted. I'm not going to break into the house this weekend because they're all at home. So, but the business community, that's a different ball game, and the numbers I think are reflective to that, and certainly in that regards. But if we can get back to somewhat of a normalcy, it'll be there. And the other thing that I think that for most folks is there's a lot more attention being paid in the neighborhoods because there's more eyes on the neighborhood because they're at home and so forth. So I do think that if there's something out of the ordinary, and we've always said it, and it was said earlier, I think by the inspector, call the detachment. They're the folks that have to respond. Don't just call your counselor and then at 7 o'clock at night and then or after the fact, and so it makes it that much more difficult. So
I think it's important for us to remember that this community supports the Ontario Provincial Police. They're very proud of their policing service. They're also proud of the statistics they see when this community is rated as one of the safest communities in Canada. So I think I think because of that little slip, and it's a percentage slip that people notice, and it flares up, and council rightly was questioned, and they brought it to us. I think we can complete the loop and go back to council maybe with just a similar overview that you could present to council and for their consumption, that they would be able to have information at their disposal that they can address any citizens who may have a question as to the police service in Tecumseh.
the only other piece I'll add, and I'll let certainly the other board members to weigh in as well, is that I've always been whether it was a councillor, deputy mayor, or mayor, warden, I've always looked at customer service as number one. And there's nothing wrong with continuous improvement. And I think this is, we should always, and I'm not just saying the police service, I'm talking everybody, including myself, my council, my administration, everybody. We should all be striving to be the best that we can be. There's certain situations, the general public sometimes are, the expectations are quite high because of the fact that we are a safe community and we do have good representation from the men and women that certainly take care of us in terms of the safety of the community and so forth, just like our fire department and our EMS. Our first responders are top notch, and so I think that also is something that continuous improvement, we're always trying, and we've initiated a lot of great things here. I think just recently I had heard in Windsor where somebody was selling something on the internet and ended up getting robbed. Well, guess what? We got a nice program right here in Tecumseh, right between town hall and it's a little off, but those are small things that add to the creativity, obviously, and I look at that as continuous improvement in terms of that particular, that service and that. So, there are times I don't know what it is. It's a bright sunny day. It's beautiful. People get into their cars, and all of a sudden, it's they're driving 308 kilometers an hour on the highway. There's nobody there, and what are they thinking? You know, so obviously there's a notice. People notice that, and so forth. But
So,
and I get it.
yeah.
Police can't be everywhere all the time.
Yes.
And so I think the messaging in terms of what was just alluded to by the inspector and that a delegation at council virtually can be very adapted to getting a message out to the community.
So there we have the crux of it, and I'm wondering if our other members of the board have any other inputs that they would like to see, or can we move a motion to organize a presentation to the full council that mimics what we heard today, and council will have received the statistical backup if they have the patience to go through it all. But I think the words from our detachment commander and our staff sergeant and our sergeant, those are very important for our counselors. They need that ammunition to go back to anybody who has something to say. And and we certainly at this police service board want to support the actions of the Ontario Provincial Police in our community. That's been long-standing policy of this board. We're full, we're full boosters of the OPP. So maybe we could do that. If that's, I'm looking for anybody from our board who wants to. Joe, I see you've unmuted. I think your volume's down, Joe.
Yeah, I'll have to scream. Can you hear me now?
Come up more.
Okay, that's as loud as it gets.
Okay.
Sorry about that. There's going to obviously be more business break-ins versus, residential. Like Gary said, the people are at home, but the businesses are going to be probably something that we got to keep an eye on. Maybe we can look at creating online submission with police matters so that those are kept and tracked. That allows that engagement for the public to give their input. But with delegations, I find with this format, even if you pre-record it or if you come to council, it's recorded, but the actual presentation is pre-recorded or posted for people to archive and go back to it just in itself. So they don't have to see the whole council meeting. It's easily accessible under a folder, police service board, so that the OPP, if you need information, you go right to it, whether it be a submission or whether it be a pre-recorded delegation in terms of providing this information. So just an idea for that.
Paul or Mark, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Mr. Chair, through you, I have to agree with our Deputy Mayor that probably having a submission made by video would be more accessible to everyone, and that they could see it at their own time. And I would agree that they would also take the time to listen to it instead of having to go through and listening to a whole council meeting and not really be interested of certain parts of the meeting. But I think that they would have that opportunity to view it at their own time, and I would agree that might be a good idea. I would agree with that.
I know that Sean is still listening in, and I'm wondering if we couldn't still have a presentation to council, but that section of the presentation could be extracted and put somewhere on the council site, on the town site.
I need to weigh in.
Okay.
That'd be difficult because council has questions and you can't ask questions to a pre-recorded. And
No,
we're certainly not asking the police to stay tuned at the meeting. They're busy and so forth. They do their delegation or their 10 minutes and then they're off and running.
Your Worship, I probably misspoke. What I was thinking of was once the presentation was made to council, that Sean could take that portion with regard to the presentation and the council questions
Yes.
and clip it
Yeah.
out and make it into some kind of a package that could be viewed by the general public.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
And now I would ask for regard to the municipal act and stuff to Margaret if that's fair game with regard to the proceedings of council.
Through the chair, I've taken the liberty of drafting a motion in that regard. It's certainly fine for the OPP to be a delegation to council and to do that electronically, and then yes, it can be saved, and the council meetings are indexed, so anyone can go and watch that portion of the meeting, so they aren't obligated to watch the whole meeting. So if it's your pleasure, Mr. Chair, I can read the draft motion for consideration.
I absolutely would love that.
Okay. That the OPP report on the 2019 Tecumseh Community Survey be forwarded to council, and that Inspector Miller or his delegate appear before council as a delegation to present their report.
And Inspector Miller, is that acceptable to you to make a direct presentation to council?
Yeah, I think as you were saying, Mr. Chair, I'm used to doing that actually with you. We do that every year, providing a little bit more of a focus as to what we'll be talking about is always helpful, because we have a limited period of time and everyone's time is so important. But I'm sure that you may wish to join me for that as well. And always pleased to have that conversation. And most importantly, to be able to answer any questions. If the information is available to the town council, or if they have specific questions, so that we have answers, it's good to know maybe what some of those particular questions are.
So that's a matter of scheduling to make sure that you're not pre-warned, but certainly you would have their concerns, having looked at the statistical analysis.
Yeah, it's important, because that's all I can make a reference to, and to provide, at least provide an explanation is based on the data.
Okay. So could I have someone move that Paul is moved, that we need a seconder for that motion, and Mark? Are there any other discussion on this motion? So then, having seen no other, all in favor? Passed. Excellent. Well, I think that's given a really good way to wrap up that survey and a report back in a very positive manner to council. And also, I think it's a great idea that we're going to leave something for our citizenry to refer to if they have any questions with regard to the services they're getting from the detachment. Okay. If we can move on to new business, item L, COVID pandemic. And Margaret, I believe you were going to report to us.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just a brief verbal report to indicate what has transpired over the last several months, similar to what Inspector Miller provided at the outset of his report. Just to let the Police Services Board know, it's been certainly an upheaval, to say the least, with the COVID-19 pandemic. And the administration has been responding in some cases in concert with the OPP and other agencies. And I'd also mention that we have the double threat of inland lake flooding that we've also been addressing with the support of council over the last several months. But similarly, once the province declared its state of emergency, a few days later on March 22nd, the mayor declared a local emergency for both COVID-19 and the prospect of local inland flooding from Lake St. Clair. And a number of things were put into action as a result. So we've had a number of closures of town facilities and offices as a result of the COVID-19, similar to municipalities across the province. Also experienced a change in work arrangements with our staff, several of them working from home, and adjustments to how many people we can put in a truck in order to maintain the physical and social distancing requirements. And also some changes in our service delivery that have been made once again with the support of council, including how we meet. So here we are, a direct product of that, with the council approving the extension of electronic meeting capacity to its boards and committees at the last meeting. In terms of direct impact on policing services, we have worked with our bylaw enforcement officer and our park staff jointly and very cooperatively with the OPP to assist with the enforcement of orders under the EMCPA. And I think that's worked quite effectively, particularly with the nice sort of graduated approach that the OPP had introduced with respect to talking to people, doing as much through public education and a soft approach to gaining compliance rather than fining and ticketing. And that's, I think, been fairly successful. That coupled with the mayor's twice weekly video since the COVID-19 matter erupted, he has helped immensely with messaging to the general public about expectations with respect to behavior and very much promoting the message of the public health agency. So all together, good teamwork in terms of trying to keep everyone safe in the community. We've also experienced, as was mentioned under the correspondence, that there will be an extension to the community safety and well-being plan deadline. Now they have not indicated what that extension, the new deadline will be. That is being done in deliberation with the Solicitor General and other AMO and other agencies. So we expect to hear that, and when we do, we will certainly let the board know. The planning process on that, I can tell you, has flat out just stopped as municipalities have tried to regroup and their efforts. And then also I just wanted to mention that with respect to the flooding, the OPP has been an integral part of our flood preparedness action group. And so they continue to meet with us weekly and work on our detailed plans to respond to a flood emergency. And we're very pleased with their level of commitment, as well as several of the other agencies that can help us if we get into deep water, literally. And so we are happy to have them at the table, and communications between organizations remain strong. So it's really all I wanted to mention was just to provide the Police Services Board with a brief update. Happy to take any questions they have on that matter. And then with your indulgence, Mr. Chair, I did circulate a memo earlier, Ellen did rather, earlier this afternoon on another matter that came up at council the other night that I would like an opportunity to speak to.
Yes, I agree. I think the first thing we want to do is see if there's any comments or questions with regard to the COVID pandemic report that our CAO provided us. I don't think so. I just, the deep water, you weren't anticipating that 42-foot launch to come right up Arlington or something, are you?
No, not a 42-footer, maybe a 14-footer.
Okay. Well, because the OPP are pretty proud of that big launch they've got. I don't know if they can sail it right up Arlington, though. Okay, then please, before we do that, I'll just jump in and say that earlier today we had electronic vote for Southwestern Ontario, Provincial Police representative for the Ontario Association of Police Service Boards. So that includes all the area from Thames Centre, Grey Highlands, right down to Windsor. And Jim Maudsley was elected. He's also on other parts of our association board, but he is going to be the section, now we're going to call it for the time being, section 10 representative for our association, Southwestern Ontario. So we'll just throw that in as a piece of a tidbit. And Margaret, if you wanted to talk about the excessive noise.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm really not expecting that we would deal with this in a fulsome way today, because we've just put this memo together very quickly, and you've had a very little time to even consider it. But if I can just provide a bit of background, under new business at council on Tuesday evening, one of the ward councillors indicated that there were some concerns expressed to him with respect to excessive noise generated by vehicular traffic. So, muffler sounds and engine revving and the like associated with, on local roads where they would expect some peace and quiet in neighborhoods. And so there was some request for us to bring this to the board and also to have a conversation with the police service about enforcement of provisions under the Highway Traffic Act, and also then consider the changes that are forthcoming in Windsor that are based on changes that were recently adopted by the City of Toronto in their noise bylaw to do with the same subject matter. And essentially, the Highway Traffic Act certainly does deal with noise and with muffler systems and that type of thing, and also smoke and emissions. It maybe doesn't identify a decibel level as the recent modifications to the City of Toronto bylaw have done, or identified certain hours within which excessive noise would not be permitted, and also identified other noises such as horns, revving of an engine, squealing of tires, banging, clanking, or any like sound that is clearly audible at a point of reception. So those are, getting a little bit more specific, I guess, than what was originally contemplated in the Highway Traffic Act with respect to being able to enforce irritant noises within neighborhoods that are generated from some vehicles that are on the road. So the as I mentioned, where we're at this point in time is to raise it to the Police Services Board as we've been asked to do. And I would appreciate some time to maybe have the discussion with the police service and sort out a recommendation as a way to go forward that we could perhaps bring to the board for its next meeting on how we might recommend, or how you might rather as a board recommend a way forward with council. Oh, you're muted, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. So, okay, that's fine. I would take it that you would be dealing with the Ontario Provincial Police first, and Margaret?
I think so. I like I said, this has come up very quickly. I haven't even had a chance to do anything other than pull this memo together and sneak it on the agenda. So I would like an opportunity to speak with Sergeant Smith and others and sort out a way forward, or recommended way forward, shall we say.
Just be on Riverside Drive or Brighton Road on Saturday in the summertime. You're going to hear all the noise you want to hear. Mr. Mayor, you're muted too.
County Road 22.
Yeah, there's another duty.
I could tell you it's, we were talking in earlier on about the reduction in traffic and in particular highways and bypasses and so forth. But I could tell you, I know that Windsor's doing a banner job on ticketing speeders on Lozano Parkway and EC Row Expressway. Just wondering if Jamie, at some point in time, if the weekend is nice, especially this long weekend, I know that the OPP are going to be on the highway doing a lot of work, dealing with, I think it's the 4, I forget what they call it, with the speeding and the driving, but
And the big 4.
Somehow the traffic enforcement on the expressway, there is no doubt there is excessive speed on that stretch from going through the city all the way to Puce and in the Lakeshore area as well, because of it's a beautiful road. That let's face it, it's 4 lanes and the speed limit's 80, but I don't think anybody's doing 80 anymore. And I could tell you from living close by to that bypass, I know I get a lot of my neighbors that are telling us, you know, who patrols the expressway, and I said, well, it's us, so at some given time, especially with the long weekend, I think Mother Nature might be playing us a favor in terms of the weather. But if it gets really nice and they're speeding there, and the noise, especially from you know, motorcycles, and for some reason that I don't know if it's a quarter mile between red lights, but they seem to check their speed between red lights. And if there's anything that the OPP can do through their traffic management group, I think the neighborhoods, with the neighborhood on both sides of Ward 3 and Ward 4, would appreciate it.
Yep. Okay, any other comments with regard to Margaret's? Yes, Paul, please.
Yeah, just I guess I'll kind of direct it through you to the staff sergeant here in a moment, but I guess certainly, and the inspector brought it up there regarding traffic calming and things like that in the municipality, but unfortunately, I mean, an example is Brighton Road, is where you put traffic calming in now because of this proliferation of mufflers being altered. It actually makes it a noisier street than it was before, because every time it just gives the opportunity that when they slow, then they can do this, hey, look at me syndrome takes over, and there you go.
Yeah.
But I guess through the chair to the staff sergeant, I'm just curious. Obviously, this has been building probably over a few years now, as this phenomena has unfortunately grown. But like the situation with windows tinting and that is under the Highway Traffic Act, is there something with the noise, like the alteration of mufflers and that on motorcycles and that, has there been some hiccup in the enforcement in the HTA that you know, police services are now looking to help from bylaws to help with enforcement?
Yeah, and I'm not sure, in regards to the bylaw, I know just reading this document that Margaret and Ellen had sent out, I know bylaw is not able to stop vehicles and stuff like that and enforce this bylaw. So that would fall solely on us to enforce. We've always had the section there in the HTA, section 75. And to be quite honest with you, I don't know how many complaints we have had in regards to the noise complaints in regards to motorcycles and the mufflers, and everyone's modifying their vehicles now, whether it's a brand new 2020 Dodge Ram, they're removing resignators and just making it sound beefier or noisier as you go through gears or whatnot. And I know from riding the motorcycle on the OPP, I know sometimes the Harley Davidsons, those you know, we used to take our asp and we would be able to go, you know, put it up through the back end of the tailpipe, and however far it went, there's different strategies we could do in regards to that. But I'd have to pull the data in regards to noise complaints in relation to vehicles. And I totally understand what the mayor's saying with County Road 22. You know, you get people opening up their cars in that way. And I can tell you last night we had a stunt driving along there, and at nighttime, I can tell you there's one particular officer that's always out there picking off high speeds. And the problem is it's such a busy road sometimes that for our officers to set up in certain locations and try to get those vehicles stopped by turning them around, it's more of a danger sometimes for us to chase after them. And back before, we used to be able to stand up the side of the road, and we did it on the 401, and we'd point at vehicles and point them over to pull over. And we've kind of changed some of the procedures we do in regards to that. But I can tell you on the 401 in the construction zone, within an hour, 27 tickets. You know, so I mean, it doesn't take long, and I can assure you I'll get the traffic management unit out to County Road 22 there. And maybe, you know, later on at night when you've got some of those vehicles that are racing, we can get spun around and chase after them, as compared to rush hour traffic in the morning where it's not safe to do so. I don't know
if I may, Mr. Chair, just to Staff Sergeant's comment. You know, I concur. Usually it's not when the traffic's really heavy. Well, you can't really, you know, you can't speed as much. You do the other crazy things, but it's usually at nighttime, after dinner, and the weekends in particular when traffic's a little lighter. It's just like, it's crazy. And I guess it's worse early in the spring because now the windows are open and people are out, and so the noise is probably more impactful. But it's usually, I'm glad that night, and it's probably a nice stretch of road, and away they go. So weekends, and in particular when the weather's nice, and in the evenings, that's when they're having some fun.
Yeah, certainly straight pipes on motorcycles on Brighton Road and Riverside Drive is just, the noise level is astounding sometimes. I mean, astounding. Paul,
Just a quick question to the chair, to the staff sergeant or inspector. I mean, I may be dating myself with this question, but does the Ministry of Transportation still do the portable safety lanes and set them up in locations? Does that still occur, or is that budget-wise gone?
Yeah, Paul, and through the chair, yes, we actually do work with them quite a bit. They're a great partner for us to have, and we do a number of initiatives throughout the year with them. So the answer is yes.
So that could be a good way of, I mean, deflecting a lot of these vehicle modifications to them to professionally go over them, and they obviously have the ability to lay fines, et cetera, et cetera. So. Yeah,
and generally where they're going, Paul, is certainly in those areas where we're having a high incidence of personal injury, collisions, and fatals as well, just because of the resource allocation. But we move them through different areas, and we enjoy working with them, certainly for their expertise as well. And just so the board is aware, we also have officers that are commercially trained as well. Hold similar type of certificates as the ones with the Ministry of Transportation. So we've been afforded those unique opportunities. So they're able actually to go through these different type of vehicles. I certainly wouldn't be able to, for sure, but certainly they can, and they end up generally laying a number of significant charges, and most of the time actually removing vehicles from the roads.
Yeah. So yeah, my thought was exactly, I know as the staff sergeant mentioned, there's all kinds of ingenious ways of trying. I mean, you used to be able to put a stick up the pipes and tell if it's straight pipe or not pretty quickly, but obviously there's things that are being sold now that they're trying to in order to defeat that. But
modification packages.
Yeah. So is there a possibility that there could be, like the same as you do for commercial vehicles, do like a motorcycle day where you and check the equipment on them?
Yeah, I think definitely we could look at doing something like that for sure.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments?
Just very, very quickly, it's it's not just us like bringing this up. I think you're starting to see this in many other municipalities, that this subject's coming forward, and looking at bylaw. You've seen the city of Windsor, the GTA are starting to see more activity there. So there's a lot more municipalities that are starting to hear it from their constituents. And I think you're right, Staff Sergeant. People want to modify their cars, and there's a lot of interest in muscle cars and trucks and motorcycles and so forth. But the interest is spreading in terms of other municipalities saying, is there something that we can do to kind of, get the noise levels back down?
Okay. No other comments? Is there any other new business that we have to address? Seeing none, I notice our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, June the 11th at 4:30. And I suspect it will be the same format. I think things will not be much different for a long time. So having announced that, I'm looking for a motion, if there's no further business, to adjourn. I need someone to, Paul, seconded by Joe Bacchetti. All in favor?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, may I offer one more comment before we go?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to thank Ellen very much. Ellen does a great job setting these meetings up and goes back and forth with probably all of us several times. So I know, Ellen, that we can't see you. Thank you very much for your great relationship with us. We really enjoy it.
I just from my own, Ellen usually sits at my side when we're having a real meeting, and she has a very sharp pencil, and she usually jabs me in the ribs when I miss a section of this. So unfortunately, she doesn't have the electronic equivalent to give me a heads up when I miss something. So I'm kind of flying a little bit solo here, and I think I haven't done too badly. And I always think Ellen is, and you know, not only that, we should remember too, Ellen is a wealth of background information over many boards, over many years of these meetings. She's astounding that she'll say, no, we talked about that 4 years ago, and it's amazing. She's an amazing gal. I thought I saw a hand come up over there, no?
No, I think Ellen should show herself. Put the video on there. She's probably just maybe
And-
blushing a little bit here.
There she is.
You'll see me blushing.
Well, so
happy
there you
happy
go.
to be of assistance.
Okay. So we've so moved, and we've even had a little addition to that. So meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night. Stay safe.
Thank you, Sean.
Bye. Bye.
Good. Well done, Chris.
Thank you.